So today's daf is Yud Aleph, and we're starting with Rav Ashi. Now, Rav Ashi, to just review, we had a stira, a contradiction in a brisa from the Reisha to the Sefer. Rav Ashi is going to try to reconcile that contradiction. And the Reisha of the brisa says that if you have a situation of three brothers, that's called Hacholetz liyavimto v'chazar v'kitcha umeis tzricha chalitza min ha'achim. So let's say, for example, you have Ruvain, Shimon, and Levi are brothers, and Shimon marries Sarah. Levi marries Rivka. And Levi dies without any children. So his wife Rivka falls for Yibum to Ruvain and Shimon. Shimon gives Rivka, Eshes Levi, Chalitza, and now he can no longer marry her because of the lav of Lo Yivna. Now, according to Rabbi Yochanan, that lav is uniform amongst all the brothers because Shimon's Chalitza was a shlichus on behalf of Ruvain as well. So both Shimon and Ruvain are asurim al Rivka midin lav. Now Shimon gives kiddushin to Rivka after he gave a chalit. In that case, the kiddushin is valid because we paskin like Chachamim of Rabbi Akiva that kiddushin tovtzu b'chayvi lav. And now Shimon dies without any children. And his wives, one wife was his original wife, that's Sarah. And then as far as Eshes Levi is concerned, Rivka, he was Mekadesh her as well. So both of them fall for Yibum to Ruvain. Now, according to Rabbi Yochanan, since in the case of Chalita, we're dealing with Chayve Lavin for all the brothers, and Rivka, therefore, is Asur al Ruvain only belav. With regard to Chayve Lab, the fall for Yibum, then is Chalita without Yibum. And that's exactly what it says here in the Reish of the Brisa, that Hacholetz liyavimto, right? In this case, Shimon gave Chalitza to Rivka, who was Eshes Ruvain, and then Chazar V'kitcha, he goes ahead and he marries her and violates the lav, and then he dies. Tzricha chalitza min ha'achim. She'll need chalitza from Ruvain. And that's a clear-cut proof to Rabbi Yochanan, because according to Reish Lakish, there'd be no need for chalitza because after Rivka receives chalitza, she's now asura al Ruvain the Isur Karetz, Hsah. Therefore, there would be no chalitza. But then the Sefer says that Omad Echem min ha'achim v'kitcha ein la alav klum. Now, what this means is, and that's going to be here, he has a diagram here in which Levi gave chalitza to Sarah, and therefore Sarah becomes asura on the other two achim, which is Reuven and Shimon, b'lav lo yivne, and v'omad echad min ha'achim, let's say it was Shimon who got up and kidcha. So ein la alav klum. That means the kiddushin are not tofes. That's against Rabbi Yochanan, because according to Rabbi Yochanan, kiddushin should be tofes, because Shimon's relationship to Sarah is that of Chayve Lavin. So why does it say Ein la alav klum? She doesn't even need to get. That's where Rav Ashi here on the top of Daf Yud Aleph comes to reconcile. Rav Ashi Savar lo Reish Lakish. She holds that vis-a-vis the other achim, not the Choletz himself, there's an Isur Karetz. Mitaritz la Rabbi Shimon. He's going to reconcile this stira between the Reish and the Seif according to Reb Shimon. The Gemara will explain. V'Ravina savrla k'Rab Yochanan, u'mitaritz k'Rabbana. And Ravina accepts the sheet of Rab Yochanan that the Iser of the Chalutza vis-a-vis the Achim is uniform because the Choletz is the Shliach of all the Achim, so there's the same Iser that applies to all the Achim. And Ravina is now going to have the luxury of reconciling this price according to the Rabbanan. He's not compelled to introduce Rabbi Shimon. It's only if you hold like Reish Lakish from Rav Ashi except the Reish Lakish, then you're forced to introduce Rabbi Shimon. Now let's just go over the machlokas between Rabbi Shimon and Rabbanan, and we're talking about Ach Shelo Haya Ba'olama. And if there are three Achim, two were born together, meaning they're Be'olamo, and one dies and leaves his Yevamot to the second brother, and then the third brother, we'll call him Levi, is born. So Levi was not alive, did not overlap with Reuven. And now, before Shimon was Miyabim, Ashes Reuven, the Zika to Reuven is very much alive, it's active. And therefore, Levi now becomes what we call Achiv Shelo Haya Ba'olam. And in that case, there's no Yibum, no Chalitza, we're talking about an Isakaris. But if before Levi was born, Shimon was Miyabim Ashes Reuven, then Shimon now steps into the shoes of Reuven, and that Zika that was once projected by Reuven is now projected by Shimon. So when Shimon dies, and Levi was born during the lifetime of Shimon, he's considered, according to Reb Shimon and the Chachamim, he's considered Achiv Ba'olama, and therefore she will fall for Yibum to Levi. Even though she was once upon a time Ashes Reuven, now she's considered Ashes Shimon, and she falls for Yibum to Levi, and that's what's going to happen. So again, according to the Shita of Reb Shimon, it all depends on when Levi was born. Was Levi born before Shimon? Was Miyabim Ashes Reuven? In which case there will be Yibum. Or was Levi born, if Levi was born before Shimon was Miyabim Ashes Reuven, that's called Ashes Achiv Shelo Haya Ba'olamo, even according to Reb Shimon. But if what happened was Shimon was Miyabim Ashes Reuven and then Levi was born, by the moment that Levi came in, the Zika to Reuven was completely gone because it was replaced by the marriage, the Yibum of Shimon to Ashes Reuven. And now when Shimon dies, Ashes Shimon falls for Yibum to Levi because he was Achiv Shehaya Ba'olam. That's an overview of the machlokas between Reb Shimon and Chacham. So now we go back to understand Rav Ashi. Rav Ashi Savrla Reish Lakish, which means that after Chalitza, the Iser of the Chalutza vis-a-vis the other brothers is an Iser Karetz. Umetaritz law Kirev Shimon. Now he's going to reconcile the apparent contradiction in the Brisa between the Reish and the Seifa according to Rabbi Shimon. How so? So we start with the Reish. Hacholetz liyavimto v'chazar v'kidsha. He gave chalitza, and then he was makadesh her. And then he dies without children. Tzricha chalitza ben achim. She'll now need chalitza from the other brother. My achim, who are these other brothers? Achim hayiludim. In other words, this is a brother that was born after the chalitza. And now she was married to one of the brothers. So for example, let's say we have Reuven, Shimon, and Levi, and Yehuda. We have four brothers. Yehuda was married to Sarah, and he dies without children. Sarah therefore falls for Yibum to the other brothers. That means to Reuven, Shimon, and Levi. Now, Levi gives chalitza to Sarah, right, who is the wife of Yehuda. And now, as far as Levi is concerned, his relationship to Sarah is a chiyuv lav of lo yivne. As far as the other brothers are concerned, their relationship to Sarah, after the chalitza of Levi, according to Reish Lakish, is that of a chayvei krisis. Okay, now after Levi was choletz Sarah, he went ahead and he was makadesh her, which means he violated the lav of lo yivne. But we hold like the chacham the kedushin tosu b'chayvei lavim, and therefore the relationship, the marriage between Levi and Sarah, is valid. Now Levi dies, and Sarah falls in front of the other brothers for Yibum. Now Sarah does not need chalitza from Reuven and Shimon. And that's because we're holding now like Reish Lakish that as far as Reuven and Shimon are concerned, Sarah's relationship is that of chayvei krisis. Okay. Now, there are two other brothers besides Reuven, Shimon, and Levi that were born. And those are Yisachar and Zvulun. Okay. Now, these two brothers, Yisachar and Zvulun, did not share any moment of time in the life of Yehuda. However, after Yehuda's death, Levi was choletz Eshes Yehuda Sarah, and then he was makadesh her. When these two young men are born, they now overlap with Levi. And Levi dies without children. Now Sarah, who was the former Eshes Yehuda, who is now Eshes Levi by virtue of Kedushin, and again, that Kedushin is valid because Levi was the choletz, and that's only chayvei lavim. She now, with the death of Levi, falls for Yibum to Yisachar and Zvulun. According to Reb Shimon, she will need chalitza from Yisachar and Zvulun. Why? Because they were born after Levi married Sarah. Once Levi married Sarah, and for that matter, even before that, when he performed chalitza for Sarah, the zika back to Yehuda, who was the original H of Sarah, is gone. And according to Reb Shimon, now that Levi was makadesh Sarah, there's a whole new ballgame. With the birth of Zvulun and Yisachar, there's a brand new zika that's generated by Levi. And Levi and Yisachar and Zvulun share life together. Fine. Ukeman kerebi Shimon. And this all works out according to Reb Shimon. And that's fine. Now we get to the Sefer. Amad echad min hanoladim v'kidcha ein alav v'lo klum ukiman kireish lakish. Now what we're saying is, okay, he has it worked out in the names again. We'll get back to the names. That Reuven, Shimon, Levi, and Yehuda are brothers. Yehuda marries Sarah, as we said before. Yehuda dies, and Sarah falls in front of Reuven, Shimon, and Levi for Yibum. Levi performs chalitza on Sarah. And then Levi was chazar v'kidcha. Why? Because Levi was the choletz, and kuliyama lo pligi, that vis-a-vis Levi, Sarah's status is only that of Chayv 11, and Kedusha Tosa b'Chayv 11. Now, Yisachar and Zvulun are born. Levi dies without any children, and Sarah falls for Yibum to the brothers. Omad echad min hanoladim v'kidcha. Ein lo alav klum. Keman kireish lakish. Why is ein lo alav klum? Because when Chalitza was performed, then vis-a-vis the other Achim, Reish Lakish holds there's a Chiyuv Karetz. It's only vis-a-vis the Choletz that it's a Volav of Lo Yivne. So vis-a-vis the other Achim are concerned, we're talking about Chayve Krisa. So if one of the Achim Hanoladim was Makadish her, then he's not the Choletz. We're talking about either Reuven or Shimon. Levi was the Choletz. So vis-a-vis Reuven and Shimon, the other brothers, we have, according to Reish Lakish, Chivei Karetz. So therefore, Reuven or Shimon cannot get married to Sarah. That marriage is not valid. Is Ein Lo Love Klum. The marriage is invalid. Because Ein Kedushin Toksa b'Chayvei Krisus. And that's reflecting the Shita Reish Lakish. So all that, it took us a half hour, but all that is an explanation of Rav Ashi, who reconciles this brisa according to Rav Shimon and Reish Lakish. Now we get to Ravina. Ravina Savrala Rabbi Yochanan, which means vis-a-vis the other Achim, after Chalitza, it's only Chayvei Lav. Umitaritz la leave the Rabbana. He's going to reconcile this price without introducing Reb Shimon, according to the Rabbana. So we can start with the ratio. Is stricha chalitza min achim? She needs chalitza. Why? Because it's achim hanoladim, and the kedushin is valid. Even though he was the choletz, and the Torah says lo yivna, he's enjoined with the lav from marrying her, but he went ahead and he violated the Torah law. But the kedushin is valid because we're talking about chayvei lavin. Kiman kirab Yochanan. Why do the other achim require chalitza? Because vis-a-vis the other achim, it's the same chayvei lavin. That's Rabbi Yochanan's halach, that there's a uniform isur lav regarding all the achim. So there's no chiyuv kares, and these achim were alive at the time of Reuven. They overlap with Reuven's life, and therefore when Reuven dies and his wife falls for Yibum, even though Shimon had already done chalitza, nevertheless she falls for Yibum with the death of Shimon, because it's only an isur lav and kedushin tosim b'chayvei lavin, and therefore there's a chiyuv chalitza. The Seifa, that's okay with the Reisha. The Seifa says, Amad echad min hayiludim v'kidsha ein olav klum. In other words, after the chalitza, or for that matter, even after the kedushin of the choletz, ein olav klum. Why is that kedushin invalid? Because now it becomes an isur karetz. Again, even though according to Rabbi Yochanan, chalutza is only an isur lav, but here we have a case of eishes ach shelo hayu b'olamo, which according to the Rabbanon is always going to be a chiyuv karetz. Whether or not the yibum of the other brother, the first brother, right, the first yavam, predated the birth of the next brother, or even if the birth came before the Yibum, in all cases, there's an isur karetz, and therefore ein lo olav klum. So it means that even if Shimon was miyabim her, and only afterwards Levi was born, which according to Rav Shimon would be a chi of Yibum, but according to Rabbanan, it's Eishes Achshel Hoyibol Lama, despite the fact that Shimon's Yibum predated Levi's birth. And here too, even though Levi was born after the Chalitza and the Kedushin of Shimon, which now you would say that the Zika comes from Shimon and not from Ruvain, and that would be the Shita of Reish Lakish, but we're holding now, I'm sorry, that would be the Shita of Shimon, but we're holding now like a Rabbanan of Shimon, and therefore the very moment that he's born, it's Eishes Achiv Shelo Hayibol Lomo, and that's an Isakares. So all this is a hashlama to complete what we started yesterday. Okay. Now, we have to emphasize the following. When a person dies and he leaves X number of women for Yibum to his surviving brother, there's only going to be Yibum to one of his wives. If after he was Miyabim one of them, he would have a relationship with the Tzara, in other words, with the other wife of his late brother, then he violates Asher Lo Yivneh as Beis Echad, Achiv. And the Chachamim say Beis Achiv in the singular, Bayis Echad Uboneh, V'yeino Boneh Shnei Bat. Okay. Now, you might have said logically that since he cannot be Yabim two of his late brother's wives, the second one after Yibum to the first is now Eishes Ach, because she was married to his late brother and there was no mitzvah of Yibum. However, the Torah says no. You're only chayav in an essay. You violate the essay of Asher Lo Yivneh Es Beis Achiv Bayis Echad V'lo Shnei Bat. Itmar Haba Al Yevamot Uba Echad Min Ha'achim Al Tzarasa. If now the other brother has a relationship with the Tzara, Pligi Bar of Achar Avina Chad Omar Bikares V'Chad Omar B'Eseh. Okay, so that's what we have. We have one man the Omer says he violated an essay by Sechad Lo Shnei Batim, and the other sheet that says no, since there's by Sechad Lo Shnei Batim, the Tzara goes back to the Yisrael Eishes Ach, and that generates a Chiv Kares. Man the Omer B'Kares. The Gemara now explains the Machlokes. Kireish Lakish, he holds like Reish Lakish. Just like Reish Lakish said that in the case of Chalitza, the Chalitza is operating on his own behalf. The status of the other brothers is a separate, independent status with a Chiv Karetz. So too in the case of Yibum, if one of the brothers is Miyabem, one of the Tzaros, one of the wives of his late brother, then that's like Chalitza. And as far as the other brothers is concerned, it's Eishes Ach Shelo B'Makom Mitzvah, and it's a Chiyuv Kares. Uman Di Omer B'Yesei Ki Rabbi Yochanan. Rabbi Yochanan holds in Chalitza that the Choletz is acting on behalf of all the brothers as a Shliach. And the same thing is going to apply here in the case of Yibum, when one of the brothers is Miyabim, one of the two wives of his late brother, and he's operating as a Shliach of all the other brothers. So just like he himself, the Miyabim, would have an Iser if he would have a relationship with the Tzara of Shnei Batim, which is only an Iser essay, so too the other brothers, if one of the other brothers is Ba'al Hatzara, or he marries the Tzara, then in such a case he's only guilty of a violation of an essay. And now we get to the sugya of Sot. A man suspects his wife and he gives her a kinu. He says, don't you dare go into a private place with so-and-so. And then she violated the kinu with stira, and she was in a private place with him, kidei shir tuma, enough time. Then the Torah says that we apply the principle of vinitma'ah, And until we have a bedika of Marim, he's not allowed to have a relationship with his wife. Omar Rabbi Yehuda Mara, Tzara Sota Asura. Here's a big, gigantic chiddush of Rav. True that she becomes Asura al Baila because of the Harsha of Tumas Sota, but what does that have to do with the Tzara? If he dies and he leaves his ex plus another wife that he was married to, then the other wife should be Misyabenes. The answer is Tuma Ksiv Bekarayas. With regard to Sota, the Torah says in Parshas Naso, "B'nistera v'hi nitma'a," and that word Tuma is subject to Gzeira Shava because it says the word Tuma in the Parsha of Arayis Vayikra Yudches al Titamu b'Chalelu. So the Torah now is upgrading the status of a Sota to that of Tumas Arayos. She becomes like an Erva. My nafkamina that she patters up Hatzara from Yibum and Chalitza. Mosiv Rav Chizda is going to ask a kasha based on a famous sugya later on in Peizayin of Isha Shaholcha Baila L'Medina Sayam. Her husband went out to the far across the seven seas, and an Echad comes and testifies that he died. She went to Bezdin together with the aide, and the witness testified, and Bezdin gave her what's called a heter nesuah. They gave her a ruling that she's allowed to get married. They trusted the aide Echad. Now she got married, and lo and behold, her husband shows up on 2 feet. So as far as the Torah is concerned, she can go back and resume her marriage relationship with her first husband. And the reason for that is because if Bezdin relied on the one witness and gave her the license, the green light to go and get married, that's what she did. She went ahead and she got married. So why should she be penalized? However, that's only on a Doraisa level. On a Dorabanan level, she deserves a shtickle knas, a little bit of a penalty. She's not going to be allowed to go back and resume her marriage relationship with her first husband, her only husband, because obviously the marriage relationship to the second husband is worthless. And why don't we allow her to go back to the first husband? That's called Teitzi Mizeh Mizeh. It's because of a knas. She shouldn't have relied on one witness. She should have checked it out herself and gone through all the necessary investigations until she would finally be certainly concluded that her husband indeed died. Rabbi Shimon Omer, if let's say her first husband, who on a Doraisa level is still married to her, now he dies and she falls for Yibum. So on a Doraisa level, it's a real case of Yibum. Bi'asa o chalitzasa mi achiv shel harishon poteres tzarasa, which means that we're not going to get the tzara involved in this knas. The knas is imposed on the woman herself. She should have been more careful before she got remarried. But as far as her husband, her late husband's other wife is concerned, the tzara, why is she worthy of any knas? She should fall for Yibum. And that's exactly what Reb Shimon says. Now, what's going on over here? According to Reb Shimon and Chachamim, both agree that the Sota herself, although she's an issue, but her tzara is certainly muteris liyibum. Now, if we go back to Rabbi Yehuda Rav says that in the case of Sota, the Torah elevated her status to that of Tuma Karayos, and therefore the Tzaras Sota is Asura. But Rav Chizda points out, based on the Mishnah on Lamed on Pei Zayin Amid Beis, that the Tzara falls for Yibum. And she needs chalitza. I mean, the chalitza of the other brother is sufficient to pater her up, but everybody holds that the tzara is muteres liyibum. That's against Rav. When did I say that the tzara of a sota is asura? That's only the sota de oraisa. That means there were two witnesses that testified that she had an extramarital relationship. The ata amrit li sota de rabbanon. The Mishnah is addressing a case of a sota. What do you mean a sota? A sota had kini and stira. Well, basically, Rav is saying the following. When did the Torah elevate a sota to the status of Tumah? That's only when there were two Eidim. We know that she had snus. But in a case where we don't know that she had snus, and she's only a tzara of a suffix, then the Isur Yibum is only D'Rabbanan. And therefore, the Rabbanan are not going to be machmir and give her the status of Tuma Karayos and Asa the Tzara as well. Utakari Ma'il. What did Rav Chizda think originally when he asked this kasha? And the answer is, Kasavar called it Tikkur Rabbanan, came to Raisa Tikkur. Once the Rabbanan were Mesakem, that a sota, even in a suffix situation, has the same status as a vadai. So, for example, in the case of a woman who heard that her husband died, and the Chachamim wanted to give her a knas as if she married the second guy, like a sota who had an extramarital affair. So once the Rabbanan said that she deserves to be penalized with a knas, they should have already given her the elevated status of a sota, a full-fledged sota. We know that she had snus, and that should generate an Isur on the Tzaras Yibum. And that was the basis for Rav Chizda's kash on Ra. And we have a similar back and forth Masechet Rav Ashi from Rav Ashi. And the sota, the Mishnah in sota tells us that after kinui and after stira, nichtasa imo l'seiser v'shasa imo k'dei tuma, asura lebeis. She's not allowed to have relations with her husband. Again, there were no witnesses that testified that they saw her znus, but we call it raglayim l'dav. You know, with the smoke, there's fire. There's kind of circumstantial evidence that indicates that she had that affair. And therefore, the Mishnah says, asura lechel betruma. If she's married to a Kohen, she can no longer eat truma. She has the status of a zona, who's a psul kuna, and she cannot eat truma. The mace, if her husband dies without children, choletzes v'lo misyabemes. Now, according to Rav, if her status is that of a tuma ke'arayos, and therefore the sota and her sarah are potter from yibum and even chalitza, why does this woman in the Mishnah require chalitza? Right, sota suffix. When did I say that the status of a sota is tuma karayas and there's no yibum and no chalitza? That's only vadai. Two Aiden testify that she had this nus. And you're asking me a kasha from Sota? Kinui, stira, all that amounts to a suffix.